Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we deal with the end of the Bronze Age collapse and the rise of the Assyrian Empire. 10 questions when terrorism ruled the world. So we start where Assyria is located. And Assyria is in the middle of nowhere. The Assyrian Empire is in the middle of nowhere. It's on the northern reaches of the Tigris. Babylon is several hundred miles to the south. Sumer and the large cities of civilization, the large old cities of civilization are well to the south. This is the middle of nowhere. And even today, this is where ISIS kind of arose. It's desert. It's empty spaces. And they're unimportant. The early Assyrians are unimportant. They're pretty poor. They're pretty backward when compared to the Babylonians or Sumerians. It's the frontier. Civilization began at the Persian Gulf, at the bottom of the Tigris and Euphrates. And this is the mountains. This is where the Tigris and Euphrates start. It's not even on the Euphrates, which is a more important river. It's on the Tigris. So it's way to the north. The advantage of this is the Assyrians could do things and not run into trouble with the Babylonians or the Hittites who are across the mountains in Anatolia. They could kind of grow and do things without provoking a backlash. So the Assyrians have this little empire. They dominate the northern reaches of the Tigris. They'll cross over to the Euphrates. This is the old Assyrian Empire. It exists. It's in Wikipedia. It's in the history books. But the one that we really care about is what's called the new or Neo-Assyrian Empire. It's the real Assyrian Empire. It's the biblical Assyrian Empire. And that's the one that arises after the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse, like for all settled people, is a trauma. Now, you may go, wait a minute, why would it be a trauma for the Assyrians? They're in the middle of nowhere. Exactly. But they're on the way to Babylon. So while they're not occupied, they're not they're not removed, they're not in a diaspora the way some people are. They are constantly being run over by nomadic peoples, by people on the move, on their way to Babylon, on their way to sack the great city, going down the rivers, coming up the rivers. They're on the highway. And so new peoples who are showing up in Mesopotamia come right through them. And so this is trauma. The Assyrians had built this empire in northern Mesopotamia, and it gets wrecked by invaders on their way through Babylon into Samaria. They had a series of weak kings. You have burned cities. You get destroyed neighbors. Trade almost all dries up because of the Bronze Age collapse and the Dark Ages. Culture is effectively localized. So even that big empire that we have disappears. That big red circle on the map that is the Tigris and goes over to Euphrates basically disappears. And it goes back to kind of where the Assyrians started. A small people on kind of the northern fringes of the Tigris. So what effect does the Bronze Age collapse? What effect does this trauma have on the Assyrians? Never allow it to happen again. Now, if you're on the video, you see a map of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And it's everywhere. It stretches, it conquers the world. It conquers what was the old Hittite Empire or heartland in the mountains, right? It conquers the entire Mesopotamian river valley, all the way through where Babylon is, all the way to Samaria. It comes down the Levant, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, Syria, Phoenicia, Cana, the land that will have Canaanite speakers, one of which will be the Hebrews, and even Egypt. They conquer essentially the settled Mesopotamian world and Egypt and Hittites. Remember we had the big three? They conquered the big three. Now the Egyptians had kind of been wrecked by the Bronze Age collapse, but were kind of recovering, where the Hittites were completely atomized. The Hittites just blew apart into 1,000 different pieces. And here come the Neo-Assyrians. Why do they go from this little speck on the Tigris to this massive empire? But they never want to be traumatized, to be invaded, to be conquered, to be run through again. It's a determination to never let anyone ever conquer them again, to never be weak. So the answer that they decided on was to build an army that can't lose, to militarize their society. Because the only way you could build an army that can't lose is if you build an army, if you build a society that can build an army that cannot lose. So you have to get rid of all the other kind of extraneous parts. It is military, military, military. And you have to conquer everybody. Why? Because if you don't, they might one day rise up and conquer you. So it's war all the time. And instead of having like a regular old Mesopotamian army that has infantry and some infantry and a lot of chariots, and it's rich people running around, and you have some farmers who aren't very effective, this is completely different. This is professional. This is you constantly are drafting people into the army. That the real job for Assyrian men is not to be a farmer, is not to be a blacksmith, it's to be a soldier. And when you're not a soldier, you're doing the farming and the blacksmithing on the side. You're really preparing, always. Your number one job in life is to be a soldier. And the entire society has to be built around that. Now, you should understand that that's going to cause problems. We're going to deal with those. We're going to have to deal with those problems. So in building this professional, the first real professional army in the Middle Eastern, the European world, how does it work? How you have to explain this? How explain the Assyrian military? Well, war, as I stated, was a full-time job. It's the first standing professional army. The United States Army now is a professional standing army. Your job in the army is to be a soldier, not to do anything else. The Romans will have a standing army. Why doesn't everyone have a standing army? It's incredibly expensive. It's the most expensive things humans have ever figured out to create. You have to pay people enough money that they'll go into the military, train all the time, risk their lives in battle, and not do the other jobs that people are doing, farming and blacksmithing and trade and merchant. They're giving up all of that in order to be in the military. So you have to pay them, you have to supply them, you have to feed them in order to get a professional military. Our military, the United States military, costs $800 billion a year. It's the most expensive thing we buy. So Assyrians need time plus money to train. They need money. That money means more conquests. They have to conquer other people to get the money. They need stuff, right? If you're not a farmer, who's producing the food? Who's making the swords? Who's producing the stuff that this army needs? Well, if the men are in the army, they can't produce it, so you need to use other people. And that means you turn conquered people into slaves. Most people you're going to conquer, you're going to take their stuff for yourself, and then you're going to take their labor to allow your men to be better soldiers. Now, there are foreign peoples who get integrated as light infantry, garrison troops, who say, I'll work with you, Assyria. I'll work with you. And eventually those people get incorporated into Assyrian society. But most people are locked out. Most people are essentially tax-paying, conquered slaves. Vast majority of people are doing what they're told. Some people have the skills, they can buy in, they have something to offer the Assyrians. The Assyrians are always looking for a new way of fighting, remember, they never want to lose, so they're willing to incorporate new skills, new ideas. But those foreign people start off as foreigners. They're not Assyrians. And as time goes on, they become. This is kind of the Janissaries work the same way in the Turkish Empire. They start up as Christian slaves, and they get incorporated kind of into the society. That happens in the Assyrian Empire too. But like in the Turkish Empire, if you ask the Arabs and the Slavs and the Serbs and the Egyptians and the North Africa, are you Turks? They go, no, we're owned, we're conquered by, we're oppressed by. Even if some of our people work for the Turks, most of us. And that's the Assyrians. They're not turning people into Assyrian. They're not incorporating peoples as equals. They're slaves. So what is the advantage of this? Well, if you're watching the video, look at the different kinds of military. You've got cavalry and chariots. You've got archers. You've got spearmen. You even got siege weapons that look like Daleks from Doctor Who. The advantage is this army can do things no other army can do. It is so well trained, it is so professional, that when it marches on the battlefield, it's a professional team versus like pee-wee football. The local club team. It's not a serious fight. And we see this in something the Assyrians do that's very, very modern. Even modern armies can't do this. And that is combined arms tactics. That is, your different militaries, your different military types can all work together simultaneously for the same goal. If you are watching the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you see the Russian army can't do this. The Russian army is a modern army. It does not have the training, it does not have the professionalism for its tanks and its infantry and its artillery and its planes and even its ships to all work together. Instead, they're all doing their own thing. And they may help each other, but they can't work together as an integrated whole. Ancient battles don't work like this at all. First, you don't normally have lots of different parts. You might have chariots and infantry. Maybe you add some archers if you've got a big enough army. But this is, the chariots come rolling in, so everybody lines up, and the battle begins. And first of all, the Assyrian king is there as a general, not just as a spectator, not as a guy who says, go forward. The Assyrian king is a general directing troops. And so the chariots come rolling in. 20 miles an hour, these horses, they come shooting their arrows. So what do? You bunch up. It's a very easy tactic. The English do this at Waterloo. You bunch up. You put your shields up. You make a big circle. You bunch up. At Waterloo, just so you know, at Waterloo they made squares. Wellington had them make squares, and the horses would go around them because the horses don't run into things. Horses are smarter than people in this way. The horse doesn't want to run into anything. The horse will go around it. So people bunch up. They make a big circle. And the chariots roll around them in a big circle, but they can't do much damage because the defending infantry put up their shields. You're safe, right? Except, now that you have 5,000 people in a big circle, you are now a big, giant target. And the archers come marching up, and they don't have to aim. They don't have to hit an individual. They just point their thing up, they judge the distance, and they go bing! And thousands of arrows come flying into the air. And it doesn't matter what they hit, it matters where they hit. And where they hit will be right in that giant bullseye of a target. I mean, you've played darts, right? And it's real hard to hit that 20 or hit that 2, right? And you play the game where you knock off the different ones you get, right? But imagine the entire dartboard was 20. It was a bullseye. That's easy. You bing, hit. That's what the archers do. Well, if death is falling on your head, then you either have to pick up your shield to protect your head, right? At which point the chariots shoot you in the face. That's bad. Or, like with rain, You run, you scatter. And if you scatter, you run in all the different directions to get away from the arrows falling on your head, right? Who are killing people. What do? You're not organized. You can't defend. You can't put up your shields next to the guy next to you. You can't bring out your swords or your spears. Fight together. So now everyone's running, and in come the chariots. Remember, the chariots are like jet planes. The chariots are not tanks. The chariots are like jet planes, and they come rolling in between peoples, and they're shooting people, and they're scaring people, and now people are running away. They're not organized. They can't defend themselves, and then in comes the march. Boom, 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 of the infantry. Boom, shoulder to shoulder. Boom, boom, shield to shield. Boom, boom, with their spears. And all they do is just poke. They just stab as they march right through, and they just kill everyone. And who can fight them? You're unorganized. You can't defend yourself. You're now one guy against a line of spearmen. You're dead. So now you have to run away. And if you run away, the chariots will shoot you in the back. Meanwhile, to the guys who are really running away, the archers are shooting at them, trying to hit them. Or at the very least, making sure they don't like get their bravery back and come back into the fight. So you're talking the complete obliteration of an army. It has either run away or it's dead when the Assyrians are done with it. And then, for the people who go and hide in their cities, in come the siege engines. In come the things that can obliterate the walls. So even if you try to hide inside your walls, and you're like, hey, this protects us from nomads, in come the siege engines that are going to break down those walls, that are going to smash through those walls, that are going to help the Assyrians go over them or under them. So the Assyrians obliterate people. Nobody fights like this. And the reason why nobody fights like this is because you want people's labor. You want them to keep working the land. You just want to take their food. You want to take their money. Dead people don't pay taxes. But the Assyrians aren't caring about wealth. The Assyrians are traumatized by the Bronze Age collapse. They don't want resistance. They never want to be attacked again. They are perfectly happy being king of the ashes. So what is the legitimacy for the Assyrian Empire? It's terrorism. It's terrorism and slavery. In a way, to think about the Assyrians, and this is probably not fair to the Assyrians or Assyrian historians who I've met a few. A lot of this lecture comes from a panel that I was on in my early days when I was still in grad school. And I was doing Swedish military, and they had a panel at the Military Society of Military Historians. And they had, World War II, and they have 10 people, and World War I, and they had 5 people or 8 people. And they had, Civil War had 3 different panels of 20 people each, that kind of thing. And then they had people who don't do popular stuff. So it was the Assyrians, it was one woman. There was me as the Swedes. It was weird, off the beaten path peoples. And the historian who did the Assyrians, she was amazing. Her stuff was great. So you're getting a lot of her stuff. And then it's my own stuff, because now I've modernized it as a post-2001, post-Iraq war, post-ISIS. It's to me, it's not surprising that ISIS grows up in the land of Assyria. They grow up in that northern realm of the Tigris. And they act in much the same way. Mass murders, executions, they burn down cities, they sack Babylon and burn it to the ground. Now Babylon, remember, is a natural city. It comes back because people want to live there. People want to trade there. It's geography will force Babylon to reintegrate, will come back. They burned it down. The biggest city in the world, they destroyed it. They dispersed people for genocide. That's Israel in 725. They rolled into the northern Hebrew kingdom of Israel, obliterated it, picked up the people, and scattered them so that their culture would be dead. They would become Assyrian. They would become absorbed like sand thrown up into the wind. Those are the 10 lost tribes. They cut off the gods and people's knowledge. Like there's an Assyrian relief of cutting off a Babylonian god, and you can go and see the Babylonian god in the Louvre. Or it may be the British Museum. It's one or the other. I think they both have one. But you see them using slaves to cut off people's gods, because if you can cut off the images of people's gods, it means those gods are weak. They can't protect you. And you can go and see that god in the British Museum or in the Louvre today. You don't have to go to Iraq or Syria to see it. All of this, all of the death, all of the destruction, all of the terrorism, all of the slavery was to prove to you that fighting against the Assyrians and rebelling against the Assyrians would equal your complete destruction. You don't fight against them, or you'll lose. You don't rebel against them, or you'll be destroyed. And this is totally new. Nobody fought like this. Sargon, we didn't talk about him, but he conquered the world with a mercenary army. Doesn't do this. Nobody does this. This is nomadic warfare done at a settled people's scale. And that is totally new. And it scared everybody. If you read your Old Testament, that the Assyrians are the terrorists. The Assyrians are the worst thing around. They are the boogeyman, like Sennacherib. It scares people. Just his name. You don't even say his name. He's Voldemort, Sennacherib, because it just scares people. How did Sennacherib talk about himself? Well, he describes his sack of Babylon. I opened Babylon's treasure house, gold, silver, precious stones of every kind, goods and property without limit. Meaning, this is how rich Babylon is. Remember, Assyria is not rich, but Babylon is. I took all this heavy tribute. The king's harem, his like slave girls / wives / concubines. The harem is a weird place to kind of define. It's basically the large group of women the king likes to have sex with, but also entertain with and hang out with and do things with that aren't sex. His courtiers and officials, the singers, male and female, all of his artisans. This is the entire household of the king. As many as there were, the servants of his palace, I brought out. I counted as spoil, which means I turned them into slaves. In the might of Ashur, my lord, this is the major god of the Assyrians, 75 of his strong walled cities and 420 small cities of their environs, his allies, I surrounded, I conquered, their spoil I carried off. I laid waste. So how did the Assyrians show that they were so superior to everybody? It's one thing to beat you up. It's another thing to lord it over you. And it's another thing for you to believe that they are superior. Well, the first is Nineveh, a capital city, which is built by slaves. The Assyrians aren't going to build Nineveh. Assyrians are military. But it comes, why do you build Nineveh? And why is everybody in the Mesopotamian world going to build a large capital city? It's out of jealousy of Babylon. One's legitimacy. Now, I talked about chariots, but not everybody can have thousands of chariots. But you could have a capital city. Babylon is a giant city. So you want to be important like Babylon? You want to say, I'm cool like Babylon? You got to have a city. If you just have a bunch of villages and towns, no one will take you seriously. So we'll see David will build Jerusalem. Phoenicia is a whole land of walled cities. Tyre and Byblos. The Assyrians don't have this. They were poor. So they build Nineveh. They turn Nineveh into a capital. They had Nineveh, but it was a small, dinky city. And now it's a capital. But the Assyrians aren't going to build this. That's work. That's hard work that you can't be in the military for. So they build it by slaves. How do slaves feel about doing this work? Well, they hate it. And Nineveh is an unnatural city. It shouldn't be that big where it is. It's this massive city built on the upper Tigris. There's nobody there. There's no major trade coming through. All of that goes through Babylon. So it's a natural city to show off power. But the point of that is not that it's a working city. It's not that it's a rich city. It's not even a trade city. It's a tribute city. It's a city people come. You make them come and you make them pay you their taxes every year. And you fill it with war memorials that show you destroying them. Your ancestors destroying their ancestors. And you rub in how much more powerful you are than them. Nineveh is an act of terrorism. There's also the Great Library. Ashurbanipal, his Great Library in Nineveh. But what is it composed of? Well, the Assyrians are not going to be sitting down writing large sections of poetry. They're not going to be writing the natural history of the world. So it's composed of stolen texts, some 31,000 documents that are stolen from all over the world, from Egypt and from the Hittites and from Babylon and from Sumeria. It's control of other people's knowledge. I can take it from you. You can't stop me. It's control of their culture. I have your holy books. And if you want to read them, if you want to read your books, you got to come and ask permission. See, this is the thing about a library that you all forget. People all forget. They all know there's the books there. They all know there's the information there. But you remember, you have to ask permission. You walk in. If you're from the wrong town, Collingswood's library cannot be used by people in Haddonfield. They can walk in the doors and they can look around and go, this is nice. Can I take out this book? Are you from Collingswood? No. Then you can't. You say no. If you're a kid in the adult section and you take up a book and say, this has really interesting pictures, I really like that, the person at the front, the nice lady at the front will go, no, and take the book away from you. It's not your book. You have to ask permission. There's a power structure in a library. Now, for the most part, it's pro forma, so you don't feel the power. But owe $20 in late payments, late dues, and you'll feel the power. Suddenly you can't get anything. Suddenly you can't walk in the door. Be like, oh, we know you. You're good for nothing. You don't pay your bills. Get out. So it's humiliation because you go up to the Great Library. You go, we want to read our holy books. We have a great ceremony coming up in a month. And the Assyrians may say, yes, great, look at it. You can't take them, but you can look at it. Or, just to rub in who has the power, they look at you and they say, your great ceremony is in a month, your fertility ceremony is in a month, your rain dance is in a month. Interesting, we're closed. Come back in 2 months. Bye. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to fight them? You already lost. You want to end up like the Hebrews in Israel? You want to end up like the Israelites, gone? Destroyed? Obliterated? A genocide? No. So it's a humiliation. So the Assyrians take things, a city, a library, and turn them into acts of terror, acts of humiliation. What's the disadvantage of this? So the advantage is obviously they win. Obviously people submit. So what's the disadvantage? The disadvantage is people hate you. They hate you. And I don't mean dislike you. I mean in their bones hate you. I'm from New York. Do you think I'm happy Osama bin Laden got shot 4 times in the face? No. No, I'm not. I'm not. And there's plenty of New Yorkers who feel the exact same way. Because Think about what happens when you get shot 4 times in the face. You might possibly see a flash and then nothing. Then it's over. Then it's darkness. You're gone. There's nothingness. It's not even that you're gone. There's just nothingness. There's a flash and nothing. I want Osama bin Laden tied to a chair, placed in Times Square, and then, like the British who waited online to see Queen Elizabeth for her funeral, I'll stand online for hours to punch him in the face. One right after another, right after another. And then I'll go to the back of the line and wait to do it again. Why? Because it's not dislike. It's not a temperament. It's a hate. And people hated the Assyrians. They were scared of them. Some people respected them. But everybody in the Middle East hated them. The Assyrians had no friends. They had no allies. They didn't want any. So they don't just want to defeat you. They want to destroy you. They want revenge. And in fact, this is very, very, very important to how societies are going to work in this class and work today. Because it's the revenge of the enslaved. It's the revenge of the oppressed. That in the end, every slaver knows that they'd never want to lose. Because they figure that what will happen is, if they ever lose, the enslaved people that they have oppressed for so long will treat them exactly as the slaver has treated the enslaved. That the roles will be reversed. And all the violence, and all the hatred, and all the extortion, and all the terror that the slaver did to the enslaved will come back to haunt them. That's why they fear. That's why they fear change. That's why they fear revolution. That's why even in America, 100 years after the Civil War, the inequality, the inequity still exists. So the Assyrian Empire needed violence, constant violence to hold it together. It needed to constantly prove you can't revolt. And the Assyrians must constantly spend money to maintain that superior army. God forbid there's ever a revolt and they lose, then everything falls apart. And so you have this homeostatic system. The Assyrians have an army that can't lose, so people don't rebel. And that's fine, as long as nothing bad happens, as long as nothing changes. People don't rebel because they know they're going to lose because the Assyrians have the superior army. And they have a superior army, they maintain the superior army so that people don't rebel. So it's a homeostatic system. It's self-regulating. The Assyrians are in charge of the Middle East because no one wants to challenge the Assyrians to be in charge of the Middle East. That's fine. As long as nothing bad happens. Well, guess what happens? Something bad. And that is, new people show up. So how does the Assyrian Empire come to an end? New peoples, the Medes and their little cousins the Persians, show up into the Middle East. They occupy what is today Iran and the areas of the Caucasus Mountains. And they are cavalry. They're nomadic cavalry. They don't need chariots. They ride horses. They breed horses, which gives them an advantage. They're on an all-terrain vehicle. Chariots, on the other hand, need flat land. Perfectly good in Mesopotamia, terrible on the Iranian plateau in the Caucasus Mountains. Well, they show up. They're not scared of the Assyrians. They're new people. They show up like good old nomads saying, "We have come for your money and your food." And the people say, "We don't have any. The Assyrians took it all." And the Medes, with their little cousins the Persians, say, "Where are these Assyrians? We will show them who's really tough." And they're like, "Hey, how about we help you show them who's really tough, and you could have all the money. You could have all the food." And the Medes and the Persians are like, "Yeah, that's great." And so Babylon leads the revolt. It finances everyone's rebellion. So whoever comes around is like, I don't have any swords. Babylon's like, we'll make you swords. You'll have swords. Just show up. Babylon is Oprah. You get an army, and you get an army, and you get an army. Everybody rebels. And the Assyrians start to lose. They back up. They can't fight the entire world at the same time, plus these new people who have completely different ways of warfare than they know how to fight. And at the Battle of Nineveh in 612 BCE, everyone lays siege. Everyone in Mesopotamia lays siege to the Assyrian capital. The only way I could describe this, the only image I can give it to you, because it just doesn't happen, is the Battle of Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings. Except in that example, the bad guys are on the outside of the walls trying to break in, and the good guys, the wizard and the humans and the hobbits, are on the inside, worried that they're going to be murdered. That's the exact opposite in history. In history, it's the rebellious, it's the oppressed, it's the enslaved who have laid siege to the oppressors, to the enslavers. And what happens is they break in and then complete genocidal defeat of the Assyrians. Nineveh is depopulated. The Assyrians are scattered and enslaved. They're gone. There are no Assyrians. There are people today who call themselves Assyrian. That's because they live in an area. They're not these people. They live in an area that kept the name Assyria. But they're different peoples. They are not these peoples. They're gone. They were murdered, enslaved, scattered. What happened, what they did to others, happened to them. Xenophon, the great Greek historian who was in an army that marched through these areas, described it as an abandoned Median city in 401. So 200 years later, people don't even know the Assyrians exist anymore. He's walking through, he sees this giant abandoned city of these just giant capital, this land of ghosts, of baying dogs. And he asks, who lived here? And they're like, well, the Medes kind of live here. Well, who lived here before the Medes? Nobody lived here before the Medes. Nobody could remember. The Assyrians literally got forgotten by history. That's how much people hated them. They were only rediscovered when they're in the Bible, but people didn't believe, for a long time, people didn't believe the Assyrians could be real. They thought they were a metaphor for bad things. No one could be this bad. And it's not until the 20th century when people started to break the code of cuneiform, started to read Babylonian text, read the Assyrian texts, dug them up and found them, and went, oh my God, not only are they as bad as the Bible says, they're actually worse. They're worse than the Bible says. And that's what the Assyrians are telling us about themselves, that they're worse. And so they are obliterated from history. Gone. That's how much people hated them. So what was the world after Assyria? It breaks up. It breaks up into 4 great empires. Remember, the Assyrians conquered kind of the world, the Western civilized world, right? There's 3 major places right now. There's the Mesopotamia and the Eastern Mediterranean. There's India and there's China. Well, the Assyrians conquered one of those 3. And what happened is it broke up into pieces. You have Babylon, especially the Babylon of the king Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to show up later when we do the Hebrews. He shows up in the Matrix as well. He's the name of the ship, the Nebuchadnezzar. That's Babylon. Babylon's reborn. Babylon's going to fill that space, right, of Mesopotamia. It's back. Babylon's back, baby. There's Egypt on the Nile. Egypt's Egypt. Egypt has the Nile. It's the richest place in the world, right? It goes back to being Egypt. There's a new people, the Lydians. They're going to be the new Hittites. Now, they move further to the west in Asia Minor. They're kind of closer to the coast. They are in touch with the Greeks and Europeans. So they're further to the west than the Hittites were originally, but they're on the Anatolia. They're on the Asia Minor plateau. So they're the new horse peoples of Asia Minor. So they're like the new Hittites. They're not related to the Hittites, but I just want you to kind of get an idea that that land of Asia Minor, of those mountains, of the mineral wealth, and someone lives there, and now you have another empire. You had the Hittites before, Bronze Age collapse, Assyrians, and now into that vacuum comes the Lydians. The Lydians are important because they're going to invent money. They're going to invent coinage. And that's where we get King Croesus, who is thought to be the richest man in the world. Is kind of where we get King Midas, the Midas touch, everything turns to gold. So you get that, the Croesus and Midas become one character. And then you have the Medes, who are out on this Iranian plateau. They connect Mesopotamia to Central Asia, to the nomads of Central Asia. So you could see Mesopotamia started as a small little place where Ur is. If you look at the video, there's Ur way down there in Samaria, way down by the Persian Gulf. And now you went up the rivers, you went down the coast, you incorporated Egypt, you have the Hittites, now you have Iran, now you have Central Asia, Afghanistan, maybe even India and the Indus as part of this world. So civilization is growing. Cities are becoming richer. People's lives are getting better. If they're not murdered in war, but civilization is expanding and the world of the nomads is in retreat. Now, most of the world is still nomadic. But the civilization, the world of cities is growing. And it's growing in wealth. It's growing in sophistication. And what do these four places do? Babylon, Lydia, Egypt, and the Medes? What do? They fight for 75 years. They fight each other. For 2 generations, they're going to slam away at each other in constant warfare. So, thank you. That's the end. So, we're going to talk about what happens after. Who resolves the conflict? How does the conflict end? Be safe. Take care.